There's something about being an empath that most people will never understand. You don't just feel emotions, you absorb them. You walk into a room and instantly sense what no one is saying. You can feel tension behind smiles, sadness behind strength, and truth hiding under silence. It's a gift, but it's also heavy because while others move through life unaware of the emotional undercurrents, you live in them. You see what people pretend to hide, and sometimes that knowledge isolates you more than it connects you. Being an empath isn't just about feeling deeply, it's about seeing clearly. You notice what others miss, you heal what others break, and you carry more than most people could ever handle. But beneath that sensitivity lies something powerful, a kind of wisdom that only comes from truly understanding human nature. This is what empaths understand that most people never will. If you're ready to dive deep into that truth, make sure to subscribe to Brainy Empath, like this video, and comment below. I feel deeply, but I see clearly. Because being an empath isn't weakness, it's a higher form of awareness. They know that emotions never lie. Empaths see beyond appearances. It's not something they try to do, it's something they can't turn off. When someone smiles while hiding pain, an empath feels the ache beneath that smile. When someone says they're fine, but their energy trembles with sadness or anger, the empath senses it instantly. It's not about intuition or guessing, it's a deep, almost biological sensitivity to what's real. They don't just hear what people say, they feel what they mean. This understanding often leaves them torn between what people show and what they feel. Most people focus on words, but empaths live in the world of emotion. The tone, the hesitation, the hidden tension behind a phrase. They know when kindness is sincere and when it's a mask. They notice when affection feels conditional and when someone's laughter hides emptiness. It's why surface level relationships feel so uncomfortable for them, because the emotional truth is always louder than the words being spoken. Over time, this gift becomes both a strength and a burden. It allows empaths to comfort, guide, and protect others with almost supernatural accuracy, but it also means they can't unsee dishonesty. They pick up lies without wanting to. They sense manipulation before it's proven, and they feel heartbreak coming long before it arrives. Most people envy the empath's insight, but few realize the weight it carries. To feel so much truth in a world built on pretending is exhausting. But empaths wouldn't trade it. They know emotions are the raw data of human nature, the unfiltered signal beneath all the noise. Where others chase explanations, empaths find understanding through feeling. They know that emotions never lie because they come straight from the soul before the mind has a chance to censor them. That's why even when people fool everyone else, they can never truly fool an empath. The empath's heart is like a radar, quietly scanning for authenticity. It's not judgment, it's awareness. And once you've lived seeing people for who they really are instead of who they pretend to be, there's no going back. Empaths learn early that truth isn't spoken, it's felt. They realize that energy speaks louder than words. Empaths live in a world that most people can't see, a world of energy. Long before a person speaks, the empath already feels the emotional weather they bring with them. Whether it's tension in their shoulders, a subtle shift in tone, or the heaviness in the air, empaths can sense it all. It's not about reading minds, it's about reading vibes. They notice the difference between peace and pretense, between genuine care and hidden resentment. They've learned that people's energy always tells the truth, even when their words are carefully rehearsed. This awareness often makes empaths uncomfortable in certain spaces. They can walk into a room that looks cheerful and immediately sense underlying conflict. They can meet someone who's smiling, but feel the quiet bitterness behind that grin. They don't just hear what people say, they absorb the emotional frequency behind it. That's why they often need solitude after social interactions. Absorbing so many unspoken emotions can be draining, even when no one has done anything wrong. It's like being tuned to a higher sensitivity level in a world that's always too loud. Over time, this sensitivity becomes a survival skill. Empaths use it to navigate relationships, detect dishonesty, and decide where to invest their trust. They can tell who brings calm and who brings chaos without needing proof. Their intuition is backed by thousands of emotional observations, the kind of data that can't be written down, only felt. And when something feels off, They've learned to trust that feeling. It's rarely wrong, but being this attuned has its price. People often call them too sensitive or overthinkers, unaware that what the empath feels is real energy, not imagination. They pick up on shifts that others dismiss, and those small shifts often reveal the truth first. Still, this ability is also what makes them deeply compassionate, because when they sense darkness in someone, they also recognize pain behind it. They don't just react to energy, they understand it. For an empath, energy is language. Every look, every silence, every sigh speaks volumes. And once you start living by energy instead of words, you can't be fooled by charm or distracted by noise. You simply know. Empaths trust the invisible because to them, that's where the truth lives. They understand that kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. Empaths often learn this lesson the hard way. They start with pure intentions, wanting to help, to heal, to be there for everyone who needs them. They believe their kindness can fix pain, calm anger, or heal trauma if they just give enough of themselves. But over time, they discover that endless giving comes with a cost, and that cost is themselves. What begins as compassion slowly turns into exhaustion. They wake up one day realizing they've spent so much energy caring for others that there's nothing left for their own peace. This realization usually doesn't come from a single moment, but from years of emotional overextension. It's the countless times they said yes when they wanted to say no, the nights they comforted others while silently breaking inside, the relationships where they poured love into people who only took and never gave back. For empaths, this cycle of overgiving feels natural until it starts to hurt. Then they begin to understand that compassion without boundaries isn't noble, it's self-destructive. True empathy, they learn, must include themselves. It's not selfish to protect your energy. It's necessary. You can't pour from an empty heart. You can't heal others while you're bleeding emotionally. Empaths start to see that being constantly available doesn't make them more loving. It just makes them more vulnerable to being drained. They realize that saying no isn't rejection, it's self-preservation. It's the act of choosing peace over pleasing. And this shift changes everything. The empath who once tolerated emotional chaos begins to crave balance. They stop trying to fix everyone and start asking themselves, who takes care of me? That's when they begin to rebuild their strength, not by shutting down their heart, but by learning to use it wisely. They begin to understand that protecting their peace is an act of love, not only for themselves, but for everyone around them. Empaths eventually learn that real compassion has structure. It knows where to stop. It knows when to give and when to let go. Because if you don't protect your kindness, the world will take it until there's nothing left. And once an empath finally learns that, they stop letting guilt disguise itself as love. They know that silence reveals more than conversations. Empaths have a rare relationship with silence. They don't fear it, they read it. While most people rush to fill every quiet moment with chatter or distraction, empaths lean in. They know that silence isn't emptiness, it's information. When someone stops talking, the empath doesn't assume disinterest. They observe the emotional shift behind the pause. They understand that what's not being said often speaks louder than any confession ever could. Over time, empaths realize that silence is where masks slip. When the noise dies down, authenticity appears. They notice how a friend's laughter fades too quickly, how a partner's quiet tone carries tension, or how a coworker's long pause hides unspoken resentment. To an empath, silence isn't awkward, it's revealing. It gives them space to sense what's really happening beneath the surface. They pick up on energy that most people overlook, the sigh, the stillness, the energy shift that fills the room when words disappear. And that's what makes them such deep observers. They understand that people who talk the most aren't always the most honest, and people who go quiet aren't always at peace. Silence for an empath is emotional language. It tells them when someone is hurting, when someone is lying, or when someone has finally given up trying to explain themselves. They don't rush to fix it, they simply acknowledge it, because silence doesn't need to be solved, it needs to be understood. Empaths also recognize their own silence as sacred. After years of giving too much, they learn that sometimes the best response is no response. Silence becomes their boundary, their way of saying, I'm done explaining myself. It's not withdrawal, it's wisdom. They understand that peace doesn't come from being heard, it comes from listening to your own inner voice. People often mistake the empath's quietness for passivity, but it's actually awareness. They know when words will heal and when they'll only make things worse. And in a world obsessed with talking, that restraint becomes their power. Because silence is never empty for an empath, it's full of truth, emotion, and understanding that language can't reach. They recognize that healing others often means losing themselves. Empaths know what it feels like to carry someone else's pain as if it were their own. They've spent nights holding space for people who never once asked how they were doing. They've tried to fix broken hearts, calm chaos, and give love to those who only knew how to take it. And in doing so, they learned one of the hardest truths, that sometimes healing others comes at the cost of losing themselves. It doesn't start with resentment, it starts with love, genuine, selfless love. The kind that makes you believe your warmth can melt someone's coldness, that your patience can rewrite their pain, that your presence can fill their emptiness. But slowly that love turns into exhaustion. Every time they absorb someone else's emotions, they trade a piece of their peace for temporary calm. Every time they overextend, they feel their spirit dim just a little more, until one day they wake up and realize they've been healing everyone but themselves. Empaths are wired to nurture, but the world often mistakes that for endless availability. People come to them for comfort, advice, and understanding, never realizing how much it drains the empath to hold all that emotional weight. And because empaths feel responsible for others' pain, they rarely say no. They keep giving until they're running on empty, emotionally numb, but too kind to withdraw. That's when they start to understand the difference between helping and saving. Helping comes from strength, saving comes from self-sacrifice. Eventually, every empath reaches a breaking point, not out of bitterness, but out of awakening. They realize that not everyone wants to heal. Some people just want to be rescued again and again. That realization hurts deeply because it forces them to choose between compassion and survival. And for once they choose themselves, they start setting limits, not because they've stopped caring, but because they've finally learned what self-respect feels like. This awareness transforms them. They begin to pour the same love inward, treating their own wounds with the tenderness they once gave away freely. They learn that being a healer doesn't mean being a martyr. True healing starts when you stop losing yourself to fix others and start protecting your light so it doesn't go out. They understand that not everyone wants to be understood. Empaths begin their journey believing that understanding heals everything. They think if they can just listen deeply enough, love unconditionally enough, or explain things clearly enough, people will finally change. But over time, they face a painful truth. Not everyone wants to be understood. Some people don't want healing, they want attention. They don't want peace, they want the drama that makes them feel alive. And no amount of empathy can reach someone who's addicted to their own pain. For an empath, this realization is heartbreaking. They've spent years trying to decode people's behavior, offering compassion even to those who never earned it. They thought that if they could just show more kindness, it would soften the anger, dissolve the manipulation, or break through the emotional walls. But it doesn't work that way. Some people aren't waiting to be understood. They're waiting for someone to keep validating their chaos. And that's exactly what empaths stop doing once they see the pattern. Empaths are intuitive by nature, but that intuition also makes them hopeful. They see potential in everyone, even in people who have no desire to change. But eventually, exhaustion replaces optimism. They start noticing how some individuals twist empathy into permission, using compassion as an excuse to avoid accountability. The empath realizes that trying to understand people who don't want growth is like pouring light into a black hole. It never fills and it only drains the giver. This is when the empath's wisdom sharpens. They stop chasing understanding as a form of connection. They no longer feel obligated to explain, fix, or comfort those who thrive on their own dysfunction. Instead, they practice emotional detachment with grace. They can still care, but from a distance. They learn to observe without absorbing, to empathize without enabling. That's not coldness, it's emotional intelligence. Once they accept that not everyone wants to be understood, something shifts inside them. Their compassion becomes cleaner, no longer tied to the outcome or to other people's growth. They give where it's appreciated, not where it's wasted. And in doing so, they finally reclaim the peace that constant understanding once stole from them. They know that love without respect isn't love. Empaths once believed that love could fix anything. They thought that if they gave enough, forgave enough, and understood enough, people would finally see their sincerity and meet them halfway. But after being drained, manipulated, and taken for granted, they learned a hard truth. Love without respect isn't love. It's dependency dressed as connection. It's giving without being valued. And for an empath, that realization changes everything. They've been in relationships, romantic, familial, or friendships, where love was one-sided. They showed patience while the other person showed entitlement. They gave compassion while the other person gave conditions. And for a long time, they mistook intensity for depth. They thought that being the bigger person was love. But love that costs your peace isn't love, it's emotional debt. It's a constant cycle of proving your loyalty to people who never earn it. When an empath reaches this understanding, their definition of love evolves. They no longer equate love with endless sacrifice. They stop chasing people who only show affection when they're comfortable. They start paying attention to respect, to how someone listens, how they handle conflict, how they honor boundaries. They realize that real love doesn't demand self-betrayal. It's not about constant forgiveness or fixing dysfunction. It's about mutual safety, trust, and consistency. Empaths understand now that respect is the foundation of emotional intimacy. Without it, love becomes control and care becomes compliance. They know that someone can say, "I love you," and still disregard your feelings. That's why they've stopped measuring love by words and started measuring it by actions. A person who truly respects you protects your peace, not their comfort. This awareness frees them. They no longer settle for relationships that drain them or people who romanticize chaos. They start choosing calm over intensity, truth over charm, and respect over attachment. Their love becomes rarer but purer. It flows where it's reciprocated, not demanded. For the empath, love now means mutual honesty and emotional safety, two things they used to give freely but now require equally. They've learned that love without respect might look warm, but it burns slow. And they're done getting burned. They understand that protecting their peace is the highest form of empathy. For most of their lives, empaths believed empathy meant always being available, listening, helping, absorbing, and giving until nothing was left. They mistook exhaustion for compassion and boundaries for selfishness. But eventually they learned the most important truth of all. Protecting their peace isn't coldness, it's clarity. True empathy doesn't come from self-sacrifice, it comes from self-awareness. They realize that when their mind is overwhelmed and their energy is scattered, their empathy stops being healing and starts being harmful, both to themselves and to others. You can't pour love from an empty soul. The empath's peace is their power source, and once it's gone, so is their ability to connect authentically. That's why they've learned to protect it fiercely, not with walls, but with wisdom. This means they no longer absorb every emotion around them. They no longer take responsibility for fixing people who refuse to grow. They can sit with someone's pain without letting it destroy their own calm. That's emotional maturity, the ability to care deeply without drowning. Protecting peace isn't withdrawal, it's emotional balance. It's knowing when to give and when to let go. They've also learned that peace doesn't come from external quiet, it comes from internal alignment. It's saying no when your heart says no, even if your empathy says yes. It's leaving conversations that turn toxic, even if it feels rude. It's cutting ties with people who mistake your softness for weakness. Every decision that protects their peace strengthens their empathy because it comes from a place of stability, not depletion. When an empath learns this, their love changes shape. It becomes intentional, not impulsive. They stop feeling guilty for choosing solitude, silence, and self-care. They understand that to truly help others, they must first stay whole themselves. Their calm becomes contagious. Their presence becomes healing, not because they absorb pain, but because they've learned how to rise above it. In the end, the empath realizes peace isn't a luxury, it's a responsibility. It's how they stay kind in a world that tests their spirit daily. Because the highest form of empathy isn't giving endlessly, it's living peacefully and letting that peace guide everything they touch. At some point, every empath realizes that protecting their peace isn't selfish, it's survival. You've learned that empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction, and that real compassion begins when you stop abandoning yourself to care for others. The moment you choose peace over chaos, self-respect over pleasing, and truth over emotional noise, you become unstoppable. You no longer absorb everyone's pain just to prove your heart is good. You carry your empathy with awareness, with strength, and with intention. Because the world doesn't need more people who burn themselves out trying to heal others. It needs people who know how to stay grounded, balanced, and whole. So if this message speaks to your soul, remember, your peace is your power. Protect it, honor it, and let it guide your connections from now on. Subscribe to Brainy Empath, like this video, and comment, "Peace is my power." Because when an empath finally learns to protect their peace, that's when their empathy becomes truly unstoppable.